Thanks everyone for joining us here today for another installment of our ClearPoint On Demand webinar series. I'm Kara Kittelberger, the Director of Education. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that we will have time at the end for live Q&A. So enter those questions into the chat box at any point during the presentation. With that, I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Andrew Connor. Dr. Connor attended Indiana University School of Medicine and completed his residency at the University of Oklahoma College of Medicine. During his functional and epilepsy surgery fellowship at the University of California, San Francisco, he was first introduced to the ClearPoint platform. After his fellowship, Dr. Connor returned to Oklahoma University, where he today has a thriving practice focusing on movement disorders, epilepsy, and neuromodulation for pain. Dr. Connor is always striving to offer his patients innovative surgical options, and he was eager to perform the first in-human clinical case with our new SmartFrame OR platform after FDA approval earlier this year. We're delighted to have him here today to discuss how this platform has since become an important part of his practice. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Connor.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So again, thank you for the wonderful introduction. My name is Andrew Connor. I'm a neurosurgeon here in Oklahoma City at OU Health. And so basically this talk is really going over sort of my initial experience utilizing the ClearPoint SmartFrame OR platform. We'll go through some workflows, that sort of thing, some of the rationale behind the use of the system, and also go over some of our accuracy data and operative times, just to give you an idea of where this might fit in and other workflows and other practices. So this is my contact information. If anyone needs to reach out to me after the talk, I'm always available by email. Just a little bit further background on myself. As was mentioned, I did my fellowship at UCSF under the direction of Dr. Phil Starr and Paul Larson and Doris Wong and Eddie Chang. That's really where I learned about ClearPoint and really became involved doing ClearPoint MRI cases. And I took that with me to my practice here at OU. I've been in active practice as an attending for a little over 5 years now, and had previously used the ClearPoint MRI system quite routinely, as well as other stereotactic frame applications and different other modalities. And so when I heard about this system, I was really interested because it sort of bridged a lot of the different aspects of my practice, together, and I thought it might be a really good fit. So here's the disclaimer. I am being compensated for this talk. The images, and I don't have any videos, but the images here were obtained after obtaining informed consent from our patients. The rest of this, I'll let you guys read. Here's further disclosures of financial relationships. Obviously, I'm being compensated for this talk by ClearPoint. Also, I'm compensated for consulting work with Omniscient Neurotechnology. Okay, so get down to the nuts and bolts of this talk. So here's sort of how I wanted to lay out the discussion here. And I think the simplest way to do it is to sort of go through the kind of who, what, where, when, why about this system. I think that makes it as easy as possible to understand kind of where this fits in. So we'll go through what is the ClearPoint SmartFrame OR platform. We'll go through how it works, sort of what makes it unique and stand apart, how I perform surgery utilizing this platform. I have pictures and kind of walk through that, and then discuss a little bit why this device is useful, why I think it's great, and how I use it, and then also where it can be deployed. So for others that may be interested in this and incorporating into their practice, what will it take to more or less onboard the system? And then we'll close with just some early surgical accuracy data and also case time to kind of just round out the entire talk. So let's get started. So what is this platform? So basically, this is a picture of the device on the right. This is the SmartFrame base and tower combined. This is very similar for those that have used ClearPoint MRI. It's really the same type of rig. It's a little more sturdy plastic. It's not as malleable as the ClearPoint MRI system, but for all intents and purposes, it really is very similar. It's just sort of been, I guess you'd say, changed in order to utilize it in a CT environment or out of the MRI environment. So more or less what this is a disposable skull-mounted alignment system, useful for procedures like deep brain stimulation or placement of depth electrodes in something like responsive neurostimulation. It's used in conjunction with stereotactic navigation equipment, what I use is the Medtronic Stealth platform with O-arm, which is not an intraoperative CT. It's actually an intraoperative 3D tomogram, but it works very well with this, although it can be used with other types of stereotactic navigation platforms, as well as imaging platforms. But I use it with Medtronic. That's where all of my experience is from, and it really does work quite seamlessly, even in these early stages of its deployment. So interestingly enough, it's quite a versatile system. And that's one of the more surprising things that I found about this. It can be used really for awake or asleep implantation strategies. It's really agnostic to that. I perform DBS surgery with patients asleep routinely, although you wouldn't necessarily have to do that in using this platform. It also can be used with rigid head fixation or without rigid head fixation. I personally use rigid head fixation for stereotactic cases, although you don't necessarily have to make this system work. This is a picture of that concept on the right here with a Stealth or Medtronic Stealth navigation plate attached to the frame, which then becomes the reference point. Similar to other types of disposable platforms, such as the Medtronic NextFrame, similar idea or look. But the bottom line is it's versatile. You can use it either way. You can use it for unilateral or bilateral targets. I've used it for mainly frontal targets with deep brain stimulation, for STN, GPI, VIM, CM, ANT. It can also be used in the occipital region for depth electrode to access the hippocampus, as you would do with hippocampal RNS. It works really quite well with that as well. And it's extremely accurate. I think that, I'd like to emphasize that as much as I can in this talk. It is very important to me to be precise. And so I have data here also at the end of the talk, to go over just to really show that. But it is a very, very precise system. Here's basically how I set up the case with the ClearPoint SmartFrame base and tower. Basically, on the left here, you can see this patient supine. I use rigid head fixation. This is a Lexel G frame. My prior stereotactic frame is just the classic Lexel ARC. Although you could use any type of rigid head fixation you wanted. You could use a Mayfield or a Doro. You could use a CRW head frame. You could use probably the Lexel Vantage head frame. I haven't done that, but I'm assuming it would work just as fine. Or you could use a horseshoe without any rigid head fixation if that's your preference. This is just kind of showing how I go about it. Basically, this is a sort of hybrid between how I was doing these cases with the Lexel ARC system. So the patient's pinned, he's asleep here. The Mayfield connection that I use is the Integra Mayfield 360. It just allows us to have a lower profile so that the O-arm can move in and out quite easily. It's kind of set almost horizontal, but gives very, very solid fixation. And then there's a Medtronic Vertec dog bone that connects into the Lexel adapter piece that then connects to the Mayfield, that then connects to the articulating arm where the stereotactic plate is placed. This is used commonly in, many types of stealth navigation cases, this exact setup without the Lexel frame, but it's very easy to use. This is my absolute workhorse positioning for DBS. So just a few things to show. I thought it just is a nice thing. This is a little closer look. I like to tape these handles, not because the tape is holding it together. It's because I'm paranoid that someone will accidentally open a handle and cause the arm to unlock, although that's never happened. It's just my healthy paranoia. But anyway, this is just showing the connection. It's quite easy to do. It doesn't take a lot of, finagling, so to speak, to get this all positioned. It's really quite easy. I can walk a resident patient through this quite quickly. If I have no resident help, it's very easy for a nurse to hook these things up without me having to have 4 to 6 arms to do all this myself. But bottom line is just to show that it's very straightforward to get all this hooked up ahead of time. I think that this picture on the left here, this is just showing the ClearPoint stealth, or this ClearPoint navigation probe. To me, it just kind of is a symbol of just the integration of the ClearPoint MRI technology and the operating room technology with Stealth. I never thought I would see a device like this, and it's just nice to see it. It's also very interesting because it's a versatile piece of equipment. It's used in various aspects of the workflow. And it's nice that you don't have to have multiple different probes. You can use one that can be, taken apart, so to speak, and used for different pieces of the process of the case. This is just a picture showing the tray that it comes in, and basically it comes apart. It's given to you like this. I love the fact that it's disposable. If someone makes an error and drops the pack on the ground, we can open another one. We don't have to worry about flashing the equipment or hoping that we have a backup that's ready or something like that. To me, that was a huge benefit in having a disposable system. This is just showing the different ways that same pointer is used during the case. When you go to mount these towers, basically you use navigation to help you mount. And so this is just showing that probe. It's basically fits in this little joystick device here in the middle. That's then mounted. The screws are then driven in through the skin into the skull to hold this rigidly. And then this is able to joystick. It's very easy to use. It's intuitive. It's easy to teach with. Then once you're done with this step, to actually align the tower, which is then locked onto the base, this same piece is then translated over. The inside portion is removed and it's slid over the cannula. It's just a very intuitive, nice, seamless workflow that I really think is worth showing or showcasing, so to speak. This is just a picture of us in the operating room with drapes on, just to kind of show my workflow. This patient in particular, this is a unilateral case. I use a 3M hip drape, which is the same drape that I use for a Lexel frame case. Works just as well for this. So nothing different. The only change really was that we now have a navigation plate that's here in the sterile space with some towels wrapped around it to make sure it's protected. This is just showing the SmartFrame base and tower mounted, and you can see this little white stylet and gray peel away sheath is not all the way engaged. It's actually goes down just outside the dura here, and then we'll be doing a scan with this in position. So just giving an idea of what this looks like. So the basic steps for using this system, at least the way I do it, is pretty straightforward. We pin in position, like on the prior pictures. And again, I use the Lexel frame. If it were damaged or if it were missing parts, I could easily just use a Mayfield, which I love that aspect. I don't have to worry about my sterile processing department having that frame ready. We have a few of them since they used to be shared with Gamma Knife until more recently with the upgraded system. It doesn't necessarily require the G frame anymore, but we're able to have some peace of mind with each case that I don't have pieces that are irreplaceable that would cause me to abort the case or reschedule. After the patient's been in positioned, I personally use an O-arm scan to register the patient. This is done in lieu of, say, surface tracing or fiducial-based registration. It's just my preference, but you could do whatever you wanted. You could do surface registration. You could use fiducial-based registration. It's open to all of those things and is agnostic to how you desire to register the system. It's different than obviously using a stereotactic coordinate box on the frame. Instead, we're just merging the patient's head CT, the pre-op head CT, to the scan that's done by the O-arm. So that's the first scan. Overall, I use basically 3 scans for these cases. After that's done, I then use the probe to mark entries, and then for the bilateral burr holes. Before, I really had no way of doing that without having navigation. This is a nice way of having some assurance that your incision placement is good and it correlates well to your plan. It's a good reality check that everything is lined up correctly. It's also helpful if you have a patient that's had other surgeries on their scalp or on their head, if you're trying to plan an incision encompassing another incision, using intraoperative navigation is really useful from a planning standpoint. I do like that as well. After the entries are marked, we prep and drape, of course, and then basically recheck our entries with the navigation probe. Make our incisions. I make both of them. I don't have to do one at a time if we're doing a bilateral case. Drill both burr holes. I use just a standard burr hole. Then place the, whatever company you're using, the stem lock or the Guardian cap or the SureTech ring, and then mount the SmartFrame base and SmartFrame tower. One thing that's really nice about this, those people who have used ClearPoint in the MRI environment, one of what I would call pain points of using that system is you really can't use a lot of power tools because of the restrictions in MRI. In the operating room, obviously, you don't have to worry about a Gauss line or something along those of that nature. Instead, I can use a power drill. So I use a little screwdriver that's electric. I use a KLS Martin driver. It's able to very quickly place these screws into the skull. I don't have to hand turn them, and that really helps, cuts down on the risk of carpal tunnel, and is much more ergonomic than using a screwdriver. So that makes it quite quick and very efficient. Once that SmartFrame base is mounted, the tower is then locked into position. We then perform optical alignment. And so you use that same probe that I was showing earlier on the tower, and then this is aligned, basically using your intraoperative navigation. It doesn't end there, though. That's really what I think is what's so special about this system from an accuracy standpoint. Optical alignment is really just getting you in the ballpark. And then there's even further refinement that's done that really, really makes this robust. Once the optical alignment's completed, you're then able to calculate your total depth of your probe or your electrode. That's then measured and marked with the depth stop, just like you would do with the MRI ClearPoint system. You can kind of see it here in this picture. There's a little depth stop and a little ceramic stylet going through the peel-away sheath. This is then driven down the cannula that's been optically aligned just outside of the dura. And once that's done, we put a second depth stop above that cannula. You can't really see it, but basically that just holds it up so it doesn't touch the dura and deviate the stylet a little bit. At that point, you then move to do your next scan. Now, this next picture is just showing a bilateral placement, just showing feasibility. This is a patient, I think they're bilateral STN for DBS. Same idea, but two SmartFrame bases, two SmartFrame towers. Both incisions are made, both burls are created, both of the rings are mounted, both of the depths are calculated. You're able to place both stylets down to target. You're not having to do one scan per side. It's done simultaneously for a bilateral case, which is really great. And really, I think, makes the workflow quite efficient. With a frame, for instance, you'd have to do one side, finish, and reprogram the frame for the other side. And it's more of a stepwise fashion. With this, it's a little bit quicker as far as making incisions and things of that nature. So next part of this, basically, once you've got that peel-away sheath and ceramic stylet down to just outside the dura, the scan is then performed, that second O-arm scan, and then you do something called the pivot technique. And that's really, honestly, where the secret sauce is here with this platform, is this technique. It takes the idea of using optical alignment, and that's just put into the back seat, basically. So a scan is performed. You then are able to identify the stylet on your O-arm scan. You create a new trajectory along that stylet right down the middle, and then you project that virtually down to the depth that you had prescribed for the target you're aiming at. So here's an example. Basically, the yellow ring is where we want to be, and the blue ring is where we are. This is without any insertion of the stylet into the brain or anything along those lines. This is based completely off of the fact that the stylet is outside of the dura and it is optically aligned to what we think is very precise to the target that we'd selected. After that's completed, this second scan is done, and we're able to really investigate that accuracy. And you can see here, and this is true with every case, there's always minor adjustments that need to be made to really dial in your precision. So here we would need to make, for instance, a 0.5 millimeter adjustment, medial most likely. And then we'd have to make whatever the distance is from there to the red dot in the middle of the yellow ring anteriorly, in order to really refine our targets. So once we have those measurements sorted out, we then move back to the operating corridor. We take those stylets out, set them on the back table, and then utilize those small knobs that are here to make XY adjustments. And so we do that based off what we determined on our pivot technique. Once that's completed, right after those adjustments are done, we then insert. There's no need to do another scan before piercing dura. In the early stages of using this, I did multiple scans. I found they're unnecessary and actually not very helpful at all. But once that pivot technique is done, which is not based on optical alignment, the optical alignment just gets you into the ballpark. The pivot technique is really what makes things precise. Once that's completed, I pierce the dura. I use the Larson bladed lancet. You could use any device you'd like to open the dura. I just think it's easy to go down the cannula with that device. Once that's completed, we already have the peel away sheaths measured to total depth. We then place them down to target. Once they're placed to target, we do our final scan. So that's the third scan with both of the stylets to target, and then analyze our accuracy to see how good have we done. This is just an example on the left of a stylet to target. It's incredibly precise. The red dot is where we hoped it would go, and the actual tip of the stylet is basically right on it, slightly off to the side, just barely. Once that's completed, I can confirm that this is an accurate placement. If it's not, we could obviously, adjust and address why that could be. Once done, I remove the inner ceramic stylet and exchange it for the DBS electrode. That's also, we've measured with the same ruler on the back table. I've sized them together to make sure we didn't make any gross measurement errors and place to target. You could final scan if it's your preference to confirm that your electrode is exactly where your inner stylet was. I don't personally do that. I trust the pivot technique, and also just aligning the electrode and the stylet on the back table to make sure I haven't made a gross error in measurement. But you could do another scan if you'd like, just to confirm yet again that everything is where you want it to be. Once completed, the peel away sheath is removed very simply, and then the electrode's locked into position, and then you're able to close. And that's the basic workflow. It's very, very straightforward in this case. So why is this useful amongst other options? There's lots of options on the market as far as stereotactic platforms, frames, frameless robots, things like that. Well, number one, this is a highly accurate system. I don't think you can really, it's really a do not pass go comment, right? There's no point in bringing in a new stereotactic platform unless it really brings absolute precision. And this system, at least in my personal opinion, is highly accurate and highly precise. That's number one. Number two, it's very intuitive. For me, especially, and the reason that is because I've grew up in the ClearPoint MRI environment and also in the Medtronic Stealth environment and have extensive experience with both. This is just a merge of both of those technologies. And at least for me, it's very intuitive. I think for many people, it's very intuitive. I can speak at least on behalf of my residents, and they honestly really get it. It's a lot easier for them to understand and conceptualize what's being done in the operating room versus trying to explain to them how to program a frame and things like that. So it's just very intuitive. Not to denigrate frames or the education that is involved in teaching that. It's just to emphasize the fact that it's easy to understand. It makes sense. The steps themselves lend to the next step, which is really great. I don't feel like there's wasted motion, so to speak, with these cases. It has multiple checks and balances. And what I mean by that is you're utilizing navigation. You can always check with navigation, are we still in position? If someone bumped the frame, is it still in position? Those are things you simply cannot do with a non-navigated stereotactic platform. With this, or with a navigated platform, you can. It gives you the ability to just double check. Sometimes that's enough to set you at ease before committing a patient to an electrode insertion. The other thing that really separates this from, say, a reusable frame as well, it's disposable. It's exchangeable. If you have a part that is broken or dropped, you can exchange it for another quite easily. You just open a new box, or potentially you may have it open already and can just use it for both. You theoretically can use one SmartFrame base for each side if you wanted to save costs, and as opposed to using two at the same time. That's absolutely doable. It would slow you down slightly, but it's doable. And everything is single use. There's no concern with the sterile processing department losing something, or something being broken or not functioning, where if you have no backup, you're at case abort at that point. If you have no way to flash an instrument, you can't proceed. If you drop something on the ground, that's critical. And the other thing about that is, when you're trying to bring in DBS surgery to a hospital system, this has considerably less onboarding costs than, say, asking a hospital system to buy a reusable frame or platform. That is a big deal when you're a new person that's out of training. I mean, I remember it wasn't that long ago when I was in that boat, and the costs add up very quickly. There's so many great devices and pieces of equipment that are out there and useful for a robust functional neurosurgery program. When you're trying to build something, you kind of want to have everything. This gives you a little bit of relief as far as what you're asking for from your hospital system. Another case in point, here in Oklahoma City, our VA hospitals never had the capability of doing deep brain stimulation surgery. Now it can. They have an O-arm and a stealth system, and we're able to do that there. We're going to be building that program. That is simply not doable, or very difficult, if I was to ask the VA to spend considerable amount of money for not an incredibly high volume amount of cases, but cases that are important and increase access for veterans in our city. And so those are really, really big things, at least to me. And I think that's really why this fits so well, at least in my practice, and it may fit well in other practices too. Here's sort of just a picture to really encapsulate this. This is my week-to-week situation. I only have one Lexel frame, even though I do a high volume of DBS cases. This is what I come to, every time in the operating room, and I have to check the system, make sure we're not missing parts, make sure everything is intact. I trust my scrub tech to do that too, but I'm one of those people that has to double check myself. And so, anyone who does these cases notices right away there's missing parts, and it's frustrating. Here's what's missing: this little screw and backer on this little piece of the frame that connects, or this little piece of the arc that connects to the frame. Not to worry, we have pieces right here. And so that makes me, as a surgeon, spend about 30 minutes rebuilding this frame or rebuilding this arc, based on pieces that may be missing, maybe they're damaged. I'm not sure why it was packaged back in this way. And so this exact scenario creates so much anxiety for a new surgeon especially, but for any surgeon to come in and really hope, can I even carry out the case? Are we going to have the equipment that we need to do this in a precise fashion? And so this just eats at you and gnaws at you every time you have a case. It's so stressful. Having something that I can not worry about and not have to be concerned that we're missing a screw or missing a part, or God forbid someone makes a mistake and something falls on the floor and then we have to abort. It is just so relieving. And so this picture, this happened with one of our cases, and I thought, this is just the perfect example of where this fits in places that are using reusable equipment. And there's a lot of places that are like that. For me, this just created a lot of stress and anxiety, and it made me worry that we wouldn't, be able to carry out our mission. And the SmartFrame OR system really gets rid of that problem simply because it's disposable. So where can you deploy this? Well, really anywhere that has compatible equipment. Well, like I said here, I use Medtronic Stealth. It's an S8 with an O-arm. You can use this with Aero from the BrainLab system, or any other type of intraoperative CT. You can use this with the Mayfield head holder, a Doro head holder, a horseshoe if you wanted to have non-rigid fixation, or you can use a Lexel G frame like I do, or any other rigid frame that that you can connect to and have a stealth plate also connect to that frame. You can do this surgery awake or asleep. It's agnostic. Either way is fine. You can do this without single pass test stimulation, or with it for electrophysiological confirmation with MER. There's some basically likely that there will be a bin gun option in the future if you wanted to do multiple passes for MER, as some people do in their practice. Right now, to my knowledge, the only available option is to do a single pass with MER down the intended trajectory. I suppose you could then translate in the X and Y axis if you wanted to listen to different trajectories if that was your workflow. But there's not an actual bin gun a bin gun style adapter that goes down the cannula where you could do multiple MER electrodes at the same time. That doesn't exist yet. Or just for what it's worth. So kind of to summarize in this talk, basically, this is just our early data. And I think it kind of speaks for itself. This is our first case, 313. It's 3 hours and 23 minutes. Most of them are pretty quick. Our second case was a little longer. This person actually had a VP shunt in place that we had to navigate around. We were able to leverage stealth technology to plan our incision and to avoid the shunt and that sort of thing. We were able to carry the case out really well. It took a little longer because there's a little more planning that had to go into the case, but had good accuracy. I think that just the average radial error there. This is us measuring it real time on the O-arm scan. It's quite good. Some of these that say NA, it's not because we didn't record. It's just simply because there wasn't another side. The case on 814 was a unilateral placement. Part 2 here at 826, this was a hippocampal placement. So it wasn't bilateral. It was a bilateral ANT with a unilateral hippocampal RNS placement. So the bilateral ANT is a row above, and this is the hippocampal placement, just for FYI. And like I said, some of them are literally no error that we can detect, but obviously, most are submillimetric. There's a few, like the first case, we were 1.6, and then we got a little bit better after that. I think that some of that earlier radial error issue, I was doing a lot of different scans. I would make a pivot adjustment to rescan. We found that that's really not helpful. It actually introduces more error than it helps. So as I tell the residents, you have to trust the pivot with this system. So I'll leave that up for just a few more minutes if anyone wants to kind of peruse that. Here's my references. Pretty basic stuff, nothing too compelling here. But if you need any more questions, feel free to email me after the talk, and I can certainly send you references or any other data that you might need to make a decision. So open that up for questions. I will go back to that data just in case people want to look at it a little further while we open it up for questions. But I just want to thank you for your time. Just to end this, I would say, it's just a really good system. I've been very happy with it. It is now my workhorse for DBS and RNS. I don't see myself going back to any other option. It's been really, really great. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Connor. That was really informative. Just to kick things off, are there any particular recommendations that you have for how to get started with SmartFrame OR? Is there a particular clinical presentation or workflow that you would recommend? Or do you think it's better to just kind of adapt whatever they're doing currently in their practice to the SmartFrame OR?
I think if you're used to using rigid head fixation, I wouldn't change that. I would say change as little as possible to onboard this. And it is a very versatile system, so it shouldn't be that difficult. I don't think you'll have to make a lot of changes to pull this in, so to speak. But I wouldn't switch from rigid head fixation to non-rigid. I think that's just adding too much complexity to a new procedure. I think once you get a few cases under your belt, then potentially you could, change something and try something different. I personally am a big rigid head fixation fan. I think it's helpful, although there's cases, like in pediatrics, things like that, where it's simply not feasible. But that's what my recommendation would be, is just try to change as little as you can. I think it helps if you have a really solid background with navigation, with stealth, and you really understand that software and how to use it, and you're comfortable with it. If it's something that you just can't stand or you hate, it's going to be difficult to suddenly learn how to use it when you're doing high precision surgery. But those are the main things. I just wouldn't change much. I think that, for me, if you look back at these pictures, it's pretty obvious. I just basically took the Lexel arc out. Everything else is exactly the same, other than there's no arc here. I have the same G-frames, the same workflow, same pinning, everything. It's just now I'm adding a Vertec arm with the stealth plate. I use the same connections, same crazy paranoid tape job. Everything else is exactly the same, but I've just swapped in the SmartFrame OR platform, and it's worked very seamlessly. through that workflow. You could do the same thing with any other rigid head fixation device or reusable frame. If you're using NextFrame, for instance, it's very similar to this, although different from NextFrame, I would say, for those users is the knobs. Here, you're able to, use these knobs to slowly pitch and roll and adjust X and Y, which is a little different than NextFrame, which you're, kind of hand aiming and then tightening things up. This is nice because when you tighten these knobs or turn them, that doesn't contort the plastic, and so you don't lose some of that accuracy that you do with other modalities. So very similar to that. I think that you wouldn't have a lot of differences. I think if you're comfortable with fiducial based registration, I think I would recommend using that as opposed to doing what I do, which is to get an O-arm scan at the time. Once they're not prepped or anything yet, I use an O-arm scan to register them for navigation. But if you're more comfortable using fiducials for that portion, then I think you should use that. If you're not comfortable with either and you'd rather use surface registration, use that. It's not necessarily going to compromise your accuracy at the end, given that you should always use the pivot technique to really refine your accuracy. And like I said, I really think that's where the secret sauce is, so to speak, where the accuracy and precision really come from, is this pivot technique. So that's critical. But there's a lot of ways to get to this point, and I think you just want to use what you're comfortable with to get here, and then kind of let the rest of it, kind of proceed as you would expect.
So I feel like you already answered this, but out of fairness to the person that asked it, they want to know why even bother with the G frame if a Mayfield is easier and accomplishes the same fixation.
I'll tell you why. It's a really simple question. Our Mayfields are pretty worn out, and they have a little bit of give. When I lock the side, I can make it move just a little bit. That's why I like having a really, really rigid head frame. It's just my personal preference. For me, we have Doro and Mayfield. I feel like the Doros are a little bit more sturdy. It's probably because they're not used as much as the Mayfields. Just here, in my practice, we share equipment. That's the reason. Nothing other than that.
Great. Someone else wants to know if the metal Mayfield bed connector causes scatter in the O-arm scans. And this is something I've heard before too, but
it doesn't. It doesn't at all. In this situation, I've never seen that be a problem. You would think it would, but it's not been an issue ever. And I use this same way if I was using an ARC, with the stereotactic box and scanning with the box in place. I have not seen scatter or anything like that from this articulating arm. I just haven't seen it. It hasn't, or if it's been there, it's not ever been a problem. Or anything that we've had to compensate for or change for. It's worked really, really well.
Right. So outside of some of the clinical aspects of SmartFrame OR that you spoke about, can you speak at all about some of the value that it might provide the hospital from like an operations and efficiency perspective?
I think that, you're obviously these case times, are good. Now I'm doing these asleep. I'm not doing MER. Take that into account. One thing I think that's, special about this is if you look at my current practice, there's no way I could do 2 DBS stage 1 cases in one day. Just given the time needed to turn over all the equipment. I do not have backup. I have no backup for, I don't have like a second Lexel ARC. I never have. So I could only do one basically. Per day, just given the time it takes to process the equipment and get it ready again. So you could very easily, with these numbers, I could do 3 in a day quite easily. Now I haven't had to do anything like that or ever planned it like that, but it could be done. So you could really get a lot more volume done on your operating day than spreading it out over time. And that may be more efficient use of your, OR utilization, that sort of thing. As far as just the onboarding costs and things of that nature, it's a huge difference from asking the hospital to buy an ARC and a frame, because the truth is you're never asking a hospital system to buy just one. You really should ask them to buy 2 because you do need backup equipment. That's a tall ask. And it's a really, really hefty upfront cost. Most of the time when you're starting a practice, at least in my experience, and everyone has had different experiences, you're limited with what capital you can invest, especially when you're new, especially when you're building a program from scratch. You really have to kind of prove it before they're going to let you, have any more, money to buy or purchase equipment with. So This gives you more freedom. For instance, if you were to say, just as an example, let's say that you're coming in and like I do in my practice, I have epilepsy and DBS. I don't use this for stereo EEG. I use a stealth auto guide platform. Well, that's expensive. I would have to choose if I had no options, right? I'd have to say, well, I got to decide if I'm going to use just a frame to do all my stereo EEG, and that's what the best I'm going to be able to do, or can I use something like this that's disposable, that has no significant upfront cost, and actually also go ahead and get that robot that I need for stereo EEG. So now I'm able to serve two different patient populations with less upfront cost. I think that's really powerful. It's a big deal when you're starting a practice, especially in a place that hasn't had cases done like this.
Right. Someone wants to know, for awake surgery, does it come with an MER tower, or is it compatible with Alpha Omega or any other MER system? I know you're doing a sleep. If you don't know the answer, I do, but I'll let you.
Sure. No, go ahead and answer that. Yeah, that's fine.
So currently, SmartFrame OR isn't compatible with the Alpha Omega or other microelectrode recording systems. That's being investigated, but currently we are able to offer awake with test electrophysiological stimulation from that single pass, and then if you needed to make an adjustment. But as Dr. Connor said, it's very accurate. So if you've planned a good target, then you should be in the correct location from there. All right. One last question. Someone wants to know, can you speak a little bit more about how much more efficient or any of the other benefits the bilateral simultaneous is compared to doing the one side at a time approach you'd been doing previously?
Yeah, so I can say at least, with the Lexel, the legacy Lexel frame here, for instance, it's definitely faster. The reason is because you're not having to program in all of your coordinates into the arc, find entry, make your incision, place the electrode, confirm with the scan, then take the arc off. Hope you don't drop something. Reprogram the arc for the other side. Go unscrub. Go underneath the drapes. Move the arm out of the way. Use your wrench to move the Y and Z posts. That I do that myself. That takes me a while. I'm not very flexible, so it just adds time. So this is way more efficient in that both are aligned pretty much simultaneously. The pivot technique's done nearly simultaneous. I mean, I usually will align one side at a time. I make my X adjustment on the left, then my Y, move to the right, make my X, my Y, then I'm ready to insert. And just right then and there, I'm not having to do anything that adds any additional time. So for me, it's very efficient and fast using bilateral placement. I think if you had one base, one tower, you'd probably be running at about the same time that you would be doing these cases with like a Lexel arc, because you would be mounting, aligning, that sort of thing, doing pivot, placing the stylet down a target, then the electrode, then securing it, then disengaging the SmartFrame base and tower, moving it over and re-engaging on their side, just going to add time. So if you're doing a bilateral case, I would say it's definitely faster if you have two bases, and you can mount them both. Mount one, move the other side, mount the other, and then you just keep moving basically. So I would say that it's a heck of a lot more efficient than the legacy system, just because there's not as much under the hood, adjustments and things like that. And also the thing just to emphasize is that you're not having to triple check every single measurement you put into the arc. Is this really 85 and 85.5? Do you agree? Do you agree? Do you agree? You're not doing any of that. Stealth takes care of that for you. You can visually see if you're aligned or not. And it's just faster. There's just a lot less room for human error in that situation, which is more efficient. It means you're less likely to have to, you made a simple mathematical error, and you did, instead of 85.5, you did 95.5, and oh my gosh, now you have to reposition again. So it gets rid of that problem, which would obviously add time to your case.
Right. One last question, excuse me. So radial errors look great. Have the clinical outcomes also been good?
Fantastic. We did our first CM case and have just excellent data from that. Our epileptologists are really, really happy. The patient is actually had one seizure in the month. He was having 4 a day. So I think, that's just as a recent example that I heard of. I don't think the RNS patient is still in surveillance mode with RNS, so not sure yet. But our DBS patients are all been really, really fantastic. I didn't put UPRS data or that sort of thing here. This is just to kind of emphasize the ShareTech platform. But yes, that's a great question. Our clinical outcomes are fantastic. I'll be honest, and this is not to be boastful. My outcomes have been really great to begin with. There's really not been any difference as far as benefit. I think you could ask any of my referring docs, have you been able to tell a difference? And they're going to say, no, they're all great. But we certainly have had continued great outcomes, at least from the reports that I'm receiving. So yes. To be clear, I've never had to revise one of my electrodes, even with the ARC or with MRI ClearPoint or with this, based on accuracy or targeting errors or things like that.
Excellent. We did have another question come in, and I don't want to discourage anyone from typing a question while I'm asking this one. Someone wants to know, do you use Stealth for planning? Does the system come with its own software? And if you're using Stealth, which module are you using? Is it the NextFrame one?
Yeah. So yes, I'll tell you. So I use Stealth for planning personally. I'm just very used to using this gyrotactic frame workflow. You can make a plan on that, like ACPC, set your target, set your entry, that sort of thing. And then it can easily be ported into whatever workflow on the Stealth workstation. So what you basically are using a NextFrame workflow for this right now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Dr. Connor, for your time today. This was very informative. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to reach out to ClearPoint or Dr. Connor, and we hope to see you again on our next webinar in the future. Thank you.